Hey folks, Dennison Bertram from Tally.xyz, and today I'm going to talk to you about vesting. Picture this. It's 1963, South Bend, Indiana. The Studebaker automobile plant is closing its doors. 10,000 workers are about to lose their jobs, but that's not the worst part. Most of these workers had spent 20, 30, even 40 years at the company. They'd been promised pensions for their retirement. And then in an instant, those promises evaporated. 8,000 workers got nothing. Not a single dollar of the pensions they had been counting on. Why? Because Studebaker's pension plan was underfunded and those benefits weren't vested. If you left before retirement, voluntarily or not, you lost everything. This disaster became a national scandal. NBC did an expose called Pensions, the Broken Promise in 1972. Congress held hearings. And eventually in 1974, they passed the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, or ERISA. This was the moment vesting became federal law in America. No longer could companies dangle benefits and then pull them away at the last second. Workers had rights to their compensation over time. But here's what's fascinating. Vesting didn't start as worker protection, it started as a retention tool. The very first corporate pension plan in America was created by American Express in 1875. You had to reach the age of 60 with over 20 years of service to get anything. That's implicit vesting. It tied you to the company. By the 1920s, over 300 companies had pension plans, and almost all of them required 25 to 30 years of continuous service. Leave early, you got nothing. This system created golden handcuffs, but also created a system ripe for abuse. So now, while pensions were evolving, something completely different was happening with stock compensation. In 1950, Congress passed the Revenue Act, which created restricted stock options in the tax code. Suddenly, executives could receive stock that was taxed at the 25% capital gains rate instead of the 91% top income tax rate. This, obviously, as you can imagine, was massive. Before 1950, virtually no executives got stock options. By 1951, 18% had them. By the 1960s, over half of executive compensation packages included stock options worth 15 to 30% of total pay. But there was a problem. These were executives, not rank and file employees. And the vesting was purely driven by tax optimization, not retention or alignment. That changed in Silicon Valley. In 1957, 8 engineers left Schlocky Semiconductor to found Fairchild Semiconductor. They wanted to share equity broadly with all employees, not just executives, but their parent company blocked them from doing that. That frustration seeded a culture that would eventually produce the standard we all know today: 4-year vesting with 1-year cliff. Why 4 years? Why 1-year cliff? The logic is actually pretty elegant. The 1-year cliff protects companies from bad hires. Most people reveal themselves within 6 to 12 months. You don't want to vest equity for someone who's going to flame out. But 4 years total aligns with your typical startup to exit timelines. It's long enough to create real retention pressure, but it's not so long that it feels like a life sentence. By the 1990s, venture capitalists and startup lawyers had standardized these terms to accelerate deal velocity. If everyone uses the same framework, you spend less time negotiating and more time building. The really interesting part is how these two tracks, pensions and equity, created completely different philosophies around vesting. Pensions were about protecting workers from broken promises. Equity vesting was around aligning incentives with company success. One was defensive, the other one was an offensive. But both recognize the same fundamental truth. Sustainable value creation requires sustained commitment. You can't just show up, grab your money, and leave. So that's the foundation. Now let's fast forward to 2017. The ICO boom is in full swing. Projects are raising millions, sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars by selling tokens to retail investors. And almost none of them had vesting. Founders could sell tokens the day they launched. Early investors could dump their allocations immediately. The market was pure chaos. Retail participants got absolutely destroyed because the people who got in early had zero incentive to stick around. This is where crypto learned the hard way that traditional equity wisdom actually matters. The SAFT framework, or Simple Agreement for Future Tokens, was adapted from Y Combinator's SAFE, Simple Agreement for Future Equity structure to introduce investor lockups. But here's what's wild about crypto. In traditional equity, private shares are inherently illiquid. You can't just log into an app and sell your Series A shares. But tokens can be liquid the moment they're generated. That means every single stakeholder class needs explicit lockup mechanisms that equity never needed. Think about that. In the traditional world, vesting protects companies from employees leaving early. In crypto, vesting protects everyone from everyone. It protects the community from founders dumping. It protects later investors from earlier investors dumping. It protects the protocol itself from a catastrophic supply shock that kills the token price and destroys the ecosystem. This is why the industry settled on some pretty aggressive standards. Team and founders, 4-year vesting, 1-year cliff, just like traditional equity. But investors, they need lockups too, something that doesn't really exist in venture capital. Seed investors getting 70% discounts might face 2-year cliffs and 4-year total vesting, or more. That's way longer than they'd accept in traditional markets, but in crypto, it's necessary because that immediate liquidity problem. Community distribution is where crypto really got creative. Early projects just airdropped everything at once. Uniswap gave away $6 billion worth of tokens in a single day. Arbitrum did $2 billion. The result? Immediate sell pressure. People claimed and dumped within minutes. So newer projects moved to multi-round seasonal airdrops. Blur did 3 seasons. Optimism did 4 or more, and you can debate the success that this had. But it did, for some period of time, create sustained engagement instead of a one-time cash grab. And here's where crypto actually innovated beyond traditional vesting: on-chain enforcement. In the traditional world, vesting is a legal promise. There are contracts and courts and lawyers. But in crypto, you can encode vesting directly into smart contracts. The code itself becomes the enforcement mechanisms. Tokens lock automatically, and they release automatically. No counterparty risk, no manual distribution overhead, no ability for someone to break the promise. This is genuinely revolutionary. Many teams, like OpenZeppelin, created standard vesting contracts that anyone can use. Protocols like Sablier or Hedgie let you create token streams that vest linearly, exponentially, or in steps, all represented as NFTs. The transparency here is total. Anyone can look at a block explorer and see exactly when tokens unlock. Compare that to traditional equity, where you have no idea if your CEO shares are actually vesting or if they negotiated some special deal. But the transparency cuts both ways. We've seen projects announce vesting schedules, but then get caught with tokens sitting in regular wallets instead of vesting contracts. A number of teams have had this issue early on, where the community found that team tokens weren't actually locked in smart contracts, despite the announced vesting. This creates a huge trust deficit. For example, there's FTX, where the vesting was real, but the beneficiaries were Alameda-controlled wallets. They used vesting to create artificial scarcity while maintaining secret access to 90% of the FTT supply. These examples show why crypto vesting has to be held to a higher standard than traditional equity. In traditional companies, there's legal recourse. There are boards and shareholders and courts. But in crypto, code, for better or for worse, is law. If your vesting isn't enforced on-chain with publicly verifiable contracts, it's not real vesting. It's really just marketing. The other major innovation in crypto is how vesting applies to things that don't even exist in traditional finance. Liquidity mining, for example. Protocols emit tokens as rewards for providing liquidity. Early DeFi projects emitted these rewards immediately, which attracted mercenary capital. People would farm rewards and immediately move to the next highest yield. The solution? Time-weighted rewards. Newly earned tokens vest over days or weeks. This aligns liquidity providers with protocol success over time instead of just extracting value and leaving. Or take, for example, airdrops. There's no traditional finance equivalent to giving away billions of dollars worth of tokens to your community. But crypto projects do this to decentralize ownership and reward early users and drive traction. The challenge is preventing Sybil attacks, where one person creates thousands of wallets to farm the airdrop. So, projects combine vesting with anti-Sybil measures: minimum transaction counts, cross-platform verification, wallet age requirements, KYC, and more. A number of teams have worked with teams such as Nansen to identify and exclude Sybil wallets. What's emerging now is milestone-based vesting, where unlocks are tied to achievements instead of just time. Maybe tokens vest when a protocol hits certain TVL thresholds, user adoption metrics, or technical milestones. This is crypto-native innovation. Traditional equity vesting is almost always purely time-based because measuring milestones in a private company is complicated and subjective. But in crypto, everything is on-chain and verifiable. You can prove the TVL. You can prove users. You can tie compensation directly to protocol success in ways that were never possible before. So here's where we've landed. Vesting started in 1875 as a tool to trap workers in their jobs. It evolved through ERISA into a 1974 into worker protection. It transformed again in Silicon Valley into an alignment mechanism for equity compensation. And now in crypto, it's become critical infrastructure that protects entire ecosystems from collapse. The fundamental insight remains the same across all these contexts. Sustainable value creation requires sustained commitment. Whether you're a railroad worker in 1875, a startup employee in 1995, or a DeFi protocol founder in 2025, the principle still holds. You can't build something meaningful if everyone's incentivized to grab their compensation and run. Difference is that crypto has made vesting transparent, enforceable, and programmable in ways that were never possible before. And this transparency creates accountability. When your vesting schedule is public and immutable on-chain, you can't play games. You can't have secret deals. You either build for the long term or the community sees right through you. That's the power of bringing decades of vesting wisdom into a technology that makes promises verifiable. It's not just about locking tokens, it's about building trust in a trustless system. So, if you've never really thought about vesting before, maybe now you think about it a little bit more and find it's actually pretty interesting. What we can do with vesting on chain allows a whole new world of transparency and accountability. If you or someone you know is looking to do a vesting system on chain, launch their token, launch their protocol, here at Tally, we build a lot of tooling for this, and we would be happy to work with you on it. Until then, if you have any questions, comments, or otherwise, please post them, and see you next time.